like I said, just date on my terms, and like however I want to move, whatever I want to do, I'm gonna do it. And if it's no longer serving me, I'm gonna move on. The prize always.
Say that one more time.
Just remember that you are the prize.
Yes!
That's like his golden slogan for me.
Yeah.
This story just took a wild turn. After years of silence, speculation, and online narratives, Michael B. Jordan is finally being talked about in a completely different light. And this time, he's the one winning. Not just in his career, but in how he handled everything that came before. Because here's what people can't stop talking about. After reportedly going through a very public breakup, viral moments, and non-stop discussion online, Michael reaches the peak of his career. And suddenly the same people connected to his past are back in the conversation. But instead of responding, instead of engaging, he does something unexpected. He stays silent. So why did he choose that route? Was it intentional, emotional, or strategic? And what does this say about everything that happened before? Let's break down the full story from the relationship to the aftermath and what people are saying now. To understand why this moment is getting so much attention, we need to go back to where everything started, the relationship itself. When Michael B. Jordan and Marjorie Harvey were together, their relationship was widely seen as one of the most talked about celebrity pairings at the time. From public appearances to social media moments, everything about it seemed polished, stable, and strong. From the outside, it looked like a relationship built on mutual respect and connection. Interviews and public interactions suggested that there was a level of understanding between them that people admired. According to discussions and commentary surrounding the relationship, Michael was often described as attentive, supportive, and fully invested. There were also moments where family involvement added to this perception. Public comments from people close to Marjorie suggested that Michael was not just present in the relationship, but also engaged with the family dynamic. This created an image of something more serious than a casual relationship, something that could potentially lead to long-term commitment. However, it is important to recognize that public perception does not always reflect the full reality of a relationship. What people see through media, interviews, and social posts is often only a portion of what is actually happening. While everything may appear stable externally, internal dynamics can be very different. As time went on, discussions began to shift. And reports and online narratives suggested that there were differences in where both individuals stood regarding the future of the relationship. Some commentary indicated that Michael may have been ready for a deeper commitment, while Marjorie may not have been in the same place at that time. This difference in perspective is not uncommon in relationships. People move at different speeds when it comes to commitment, and sometimes those differences lead to separation. In many cases, this kind of situation ends quietly, without much public attention. But in this case, the breakup did not remain private. Instead, it became a widely discussed topic across social media and online platforms. The way it unfolded publicly played a major role in shaping how people viewed both individuals afterward. And another important factor is how quickly narratives can form once a relationship ends. When a breakup becomes public, people begin to analyze it, interpret it, and sometimes create their own explanations. These narratives can spread quickly, especially when they involve well-known figures. In this situation, the breakup became more than just the end of a relationship. It became a topic of discussion, speculation, and debate. Different perspectives emerged, and people began to form opinions based on the information available to them. We should also consider the role of timing. The breakup occurred at a point where both individuals were already in the public eye. This meant that any development in their relationship was likely to attract attention. When the separation happened, that attention intensified. To add another layer to this is the emotional impact of public breakups. When personal moments become public, they are often interpreted and discussed by people who are not directly involved. This can add pressure and complexity to an already difficult situation. From an analytical perspective, What makes this situation particularly interesting is not just the relationship itself, but what happened afterward. The way narratives evolved, how different perspectives were presented, and how both individuals moved forward all contribute to why this story is being discussed again now. At this stage, it is important to separate what is confirmed from what is part of online discussion. There are widely shared narratives about the relationship, the breakup, and the motivations behind it, but not all of these details are independently verified. This distinction matters when trying to understand the full picture. The key takeaway from this section is that the relationship, while appearing strong from the outside, likely involved differences that eventually led to its end. However, it is the public nature of that ending and the narratives that followed that have made this situation continue to be discussed. When the relationship between Michael B. Jordan and Marjorie Harvey ended, it wasn't just another quiet celebrity breakup. It quickly became a public moment that people across the internet started discussing, analysing, and reacting to in real time. And that public exposure is what transformed a private situation into a long-lasting narrative. According to widely shared online discussions, the breakup didn't stay behind closed doors for long. Instead, it became visible almost immediately, with reports and reactions circulating across social media platforms. In today's digital world, the way a breakup is revealed can shape how the entire story is perceived. And in this case, the timing and visibility played a major role. One of the key elements that fueled the conversation was how quickly people began forming opinions. Without full context, audiences often rely on fragments of information, photos, short clips, headlines, or second-hand reports. These pieces of content can create a powerful impression, even if they don't tell the full story. As the breakup became more public, it also became emotional from an audience perspective. People weren't just observing, they were reacting. Some expressed sympathy, others debated what might have happened, and many began building their own interpretations of why the relationship ended. This is where narratives begin to take shape. Once a story enters the public space, it rarely remains neutral. Instead, it evolves based on how people interpret it. In this case, discussions started to center around commitment, timing, and whether both individuals were aligned in what they wanted. Some commentary suggested that there may have been differences in long-term expectations. Whether those interpretations are fully accurate or not, they became part of the broader conversation. And once a narrative gains traction, it can be difficult to separate it from the actual events. Another major factor was the role of social media reactions. Memes, posts, and commentary began circulating rapidly. In many cases, these reactions simplified the situation into easily shareable ideas, turning a complex personal moment into something that could be consumed quickly by a large audience. This is one of the challenges of public breakups. Real-life relationships are complex, but online narratives often reduce them to simple storylines. These simplified versions can spread quickly, influencing how people view the individuals involved. We also need to consider the emotional impact of public perception. When someone becomes the focus of widespread discussion, it can create pressure. Every reaction, every comment, and every post adds to the overall experience. Even if the individuals involved are not directly engaging with the conversation, they are still part of it. Another important element is timing. The breakup occurred during a period when both individuals were highly visible. This meant that any development was likely to attract attention. The combination of visibility and public interest amplified the situation. As the narrative continued to evolve, it didn't just focus on the breakup itself. It expanded into discussions about character, intentions, and future choices. People began to interpret past moments through the lens of the breakup, creating a broader storyline that extended beyond the relationship. This is how a single event can grow into a larger narrative. What starts as a breakup becomes a topic that includes speculation, interpretation, and ongoing discussion. Over time, these elements combine to form a story that continues to be referenced even after the initial event has passed. Another layer to consider is how silence can influence perception. When individuals choose not to publicly address a situation, it leaves room for interpretation. In this case, Michael B. Jordan largely remained quiet during this period, which allowed narratives to develop without direct clarification from his side. Silence can be interpreted in different ways. Some people see it as maturity, while others see it as avoidance. In reality, it can simply be a choice to keep personal matters private. However, in a public environment, that silence often becomes part of the story itself. As time went on, the breakup remained part of online discussions. It didn't fade away completely. It became a reference point. Whenever new developments occurred in either individual's life, people connected them back to this moment. The key takeaway from this section is that the breakup became more than just the end of a relationship. It became a public narrative shaped by visibility, interpretation, and audience reaction. The way it unfolded set the stage for everything that followed. And that's where things start to get even more interesting. Because in part 3, we'll look at what happened after the breakup, how online narratives evolved, how different perspectives began to form, and why the conversation didn't just disappear over time. After the breakup became public, something even more powerful began to take shape: the online narrative. This is where the situation moved beyond what actually happened and entered a space where interpretation, speculation, and public opinion started driving the story forward. In today's digital world, and narratives don't just form, they spread rapidly. Within hours or days, different versions of the story began circulating across platforms. Some focused on timing, others on intentions, and many tried to explain why the relationship ended. These interpretations were not always based on confirmed information, but they still gained traction. One of the most important things to understand is how quickly audiences try to fill in the gaps. When there isn't a full explanation available, people naturally begin to create their own. This is exactly what happened here. Because there was no detailed public statement explaining everything, multiple theories began to emerge. Some narratives suggested differences in commitment levels, while others focused on lifestyle choices or personal priorities. Again, these were not always confirmed facts, but they became part of the conversation simply because they were repeated often enough. Repetition is powerful. When the same idea appears across multiple platforms, videos, tweets, posts, it starts to feel more credible. Even if it began as speculation, repeated exposure can make it seem like established truth. This is known as the illusion of truth effect, and it plays a major role in how online narratives grow. Another key factor is emotional engagement. Stories that involve relationships, especially high-profile ones, tend to generate strong reactions. People relate to them, project their own experiences onto them, and form opinions based on how they feel about the situation. This emotional connection makes the story more shareable. Memes also played a role in shaping perception. While they may seem harmless or entertaining, memes simplify complex situations into quick emotional snapshots. Once a person becomes part of a viral meme, it can influence how they are perceived for a long time. In this case, moments connected to the breakup became widely shared and discussed. Another layer to consider is how narratives can shift over time. At first, the focus may have been on the breakup itself, but as time passed, the conversation expanded. It began to include discussions about character, behavior, and what each person represented in the situation. This is where things become more complicated. When narratives expand, they often move further away from the original event. New interpretations are added, and older ones are reshaped. Over time, the story becomes a combination of facts, assumptions, and opinions. We should also consider the role of influencers and content creators. When a topic gains attention, it becomes content. People create videos, posts, and discussions, analyzing every detail. Each piece of content adds another layer to the narrative, sometimes reinforcing existing ideas and sometimes introducing new ones. Another important factor is audience alignment. People often choose a side based on their own beliefs or preferences. Some may sympathize with one person, while others support the other. This creates divided perspectives, where different groups interpret the same situation in completely different ways. This division can make it difficult to reach a clear understanding. Instead of one unified narrative, multiple versions exist at the same time. Each version is supported by a group of people who believe it reflects the truth. Silence, once again, plays a role here. Michael B. Jordan's decision not to publicly respond allowed these narratives to continue developing without interruption. While this may have been a deliberate choice to maintain privacy, it also meant that he was not directly shaping the conversation. At the same time, the lack of response can sometimes increase curiosity. People may wonder why someone is choosing not to speak and begin to interpret that silence in different ways. This adds another layer to the narrative. As time passed, the intensity of the discussion began to fade slightly, but it never disappeared completely. The breakup remained a reference point. Whenever new developments occurred, whether in careers, relationships, or public appearances, the narrative resurfaced. This is what makes this situation unique, where it didn't just exist in one moment, it continued to evolve over time. The combination of public interest, ongoing discussion, and repeated exposure kept it alive. Another key aspect is how narratives can change direction. While early discussions may have focused on one perspective, later developments can shift how the story is viewed. This is especially true when new achievements or events bring attention back to the individuals involved. And that's exactly where things begin to shift again. Because in Part 4, we move into a new phase of the story, one where Michael B. Jordan's career reaches a major milestone, and suddenly, the entire narrative starts to change. As time passed, and the online discussions slowly settled into the background, something else began to take center stage: Michael B. Jordan's career. And this is where the story takes a major turn. Because instead of responding to narratives, instead of addressing rumors or engaging publicly, he focused on his work. In situations like this, there are usually two paths people take. One is to respond directly, trying to correct the narrative. The other is to step back and let actions speak over time. Michael appeared to choose the second path. Rather than becoming part of the ongoing conversation, he redirected attention toward his career. This approach is significant. In a world where people often feel pressure to respond immediately, choosing silence can be a strategic decision. It shifts the focus away from controversy and toward results. Over time, consistent work and visible progress can change how people view a situation. As his career continued to develop, Hun's attention began to shift. Instead of discussions about the breakup dominating conversations, more people started focusing on his projects, performances, and overall growth. This gradual shift didn't happen overnight. It was the result of sustained effort. Then comes the major turning point, the achievement that brings everything back into the spotlight. Winning a major award, especially something as significant as an Oscar, does more than just recognize talent. It changes perception. It reframes the narrative. At that moment, the conversation around Michael B. Jordan is no longer centered on past relationships or online discussions. It becomes about success, recognition, and achievement. This shift is powerful because it replaces speculation with something concrete. What makes this moment even more interesting is how it connects to everything that came before. The same story that once focused on a breakup is now being revisited in a completely different context. people begin comparing where things were then to where they are now. This is how narratives evolve. When new milestones are reached, they don't just create new stories, they reshape old ones. The past is reinterpreted through the lens of the present. In this case, the focus moves from loss or speculation to growth and success. Another important factor is timing. Achievements like this often bring renewed attention. People who may not have been following the story closely before now become interested. This creates a new wave of discussion, but with a different tone. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, the conversation begins to focus on how things turned out. This change in tone can significantly alter public perception. It can shift sympathy, admiration, and overall sentiment. We should also consider how silence plays into this moment. Because Michael did not engage heavily with earlier narratives, his public image remained largely shaped by his work. This means that when he reaches a major milestone, there is less conflicting messaging to navigate. At the same time, the absence of earlier responses creates curiosity now. People begin to look back and ask questions. Why didn't he respond then? What was his perspective? This curiosity adds another layer to the current discussion. Another key element is contrast. When people compare past narratives with present achievements, the difference becomes more noticeable. What once seemed like a defining moment may now appear less significant in the larger picture. This contrast is what makes the current moment so impactful. It is not just about success, it is about how that success changes the meaning of everything that came before it. We should also recognize that public perception is not fixed. It changes based on new information, new events, and new perspectives. This situation is a clear example of that. The same story is now being viewed through a completely different lens. Another layer to consider is how success influences narrative control. When someone achieves a major milestone, they regain a level of control over how they are perceived. Their accomplishments become the primary focus, rather than past speculation. At this stage, the story has shifted significantly. What began as a relationship narrative has evolved into something much broader. It now includes themes of growth, resilience, and how individuals move forward after public scrutiny. The key takeaway from this section is that Michael B. Jordan's career achievements did more than just elevate his professional status. They reshaped the entire narrative surrounding him. By focusing on his work, he changed the conversation without directly engaging in it. And this leads us to the most talked about moment of all. Because in Part 5, we'll explore why his decision to stay silent, even after reaching this level, has people talking, and what it might actually mean. After reaching a major milestone in his career, what surprised people the most wasn't just the achievement, it was what came after, or more specifically, what didn't happen. Because instead of addressing past narratives, instead of responding to renewed attention, Michael B. Jordan chose to remain silent, and that silence became one of the most discussed parts of the story. In today's digital world, silence stands out. People are used to constant updates, statements, and reactions. When someone chooses not to engage, it creates curiosity. It raises questions. And in many cases, it becomes a statement in itself. At this stage, the conversation had already shifted. The focus was no longer on the breakup alone. It was now tied to success, growth, and how everything had unfolded over time. With that shift came renewed attention on past connections and what they might mean in the present. According to ongoing discussions and online commentary, there were suggestions that individuals connected to his past may have attempted to reach out following his success. Whether these interactions are fully confirmed or not, the idea itself became part of the narrative. And what stood out most was the reported lack of response. This is where interpretation plays a major role. Silence can mean many things. It can be intentional, emotional, strategic, or simply a choice to maintain privacy. Without a direct statement, people begin to assign meaning based on their own perspective. Some view silence as strength. The idea that someone can move forward without revisiting the past resonates with many people. It suggests focus, discipline, and a commitment to growth. From this perspective, not responding is seen as a way of maintaining control over one's narrative. Others interpret silence differently. They may see it as avoidance or as leaving questions unanswered. In a world where communication is constant, not engaging can sometimes feel like withholding information. This contrast in interpretation is what keeps the conversation active. Another important factor is timing. Silence after a major achievement carries a different weight than silence during a controversy. At this point, the context has changed. The narrative has shifted towards success, which influences how that silence is perceived. We should also consider the role of expectation. After a significant moment, people often expect some form of reflection or acknowledgement of the past. When that expectation is not met, it creates a gap, one that audiences try to fill with their own interpretations. The power of silence lies in its ambiguity. Because it does not provide a clear answer, it allows multiple narratives to exist at the same time. This keeps the discussion open-ended and ongoing. Another key element is contrast with earlier events. During the breakup and the initial wave of online discussion, Michael did not engage heavily. That pattern has continued even after achieving success. This consistency suggests that the silence may be part of a broader approach, rather than a reaction to a specific moment. Consistency can shape perception. When actions align over time, they appear more intentional. This can influence how audiences interpret behavior, making it seem more deliberate rather than reactive. At the same time, silence does not mean absence of impact. Even without direct statements, actions and decisions still shape the narrative. In this case, focusing on career growth and maintaining distance from past discussions has influenced how the story is viewed. Another aspect to consider is how silence interacts with public curiosity. The less information that is provided, the more people speculate. This can lead to ongoing discussion, as audiences continue trying to understand what the silence represents. We should also recognize that not every situation requires a response. In some cases, choosing not to engage can be a way of moving forward. It can signal that the focus is on the present rather than revisiting the past. At this stage, the silence itself has become part of the story. It is no longer just about what happened. It is about how it is being handled now. This adds a new dimension to the narrative, in one that is shaped by interpretation rather than direct communication. The key takeaway from this section is that silence can be as powerful as words. It can influence perception, shape narratives, and create ongoing discussion. In this case, it has become one of the most talked about aspects of the situation. And now, we reach the final part of the story. Because in part 6, we'll look at the bigger picture, what this situation reveals about public narratives, personal growth, and how stories evolve over time. As we reach the final part of this story, it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture. Because this situation is no longer just about a relationship, a breakup, or even a moment of silence. It's about how narratives are created, how they evolve, and how individuals can reshape them over time. At the beginning, the focus was on the relationship, then it shifted to the breakup. After that, it became about public reactions, online narratives, and speculation. Now it has transformed into something entirely different, a story about growth, perception, and how actions over time can redefine everything that came before. One of the most important lessons here is how quickly public narratives can form. In the early stages, people relied on limited information to build their understanding of the situation. These interpretations spread rapidly, creating a version of the story that many accepted as reality. But narratives are not fixed. They change based on new developments. As Michael B. Jordan continued to focus on his career and eventually reached a major milestone, the narrative began to shift. What was once seen through one lens is now being viewed through another. This highlights the importance of time. In fast-moving situations, it can feel like the initial narrative is final. But over time, new information and new achievements can reshape how events are understood. What seems significant at one moment may appear differently later. Another key takeaway is the concept of narrative control. While individuals may not always be able to control what is said about them, they can influence how they are perceived through their actions. By choosing not to engage directly and instead focusing on his work, Michael effectively redirected attention. This approach is not always easy. In a world where immediate responses are expected, choosing patience requires discipline. It involves trusting that actions will eventually speak louder than words. In this case, that approach appears to have played a major role in how the story evolved. We should also consider the role of public perception. Perception is shaped by a combination of information, emotion, and repetition. Once a narrative is established, it can be difficult to change. However, consistent actions over time can gradually shift that perception. Another important aspect is the difference between short-term and long-term impact. In the short term, public narratives can feel overwhelming, but in the long term, sustained effort and visible growth can outweigh earlier discussions. This is where the focus moves from what happened to what was achieved afterward. The situation also highlights how silence can function as a form of communication. While it does not provide direct answers, it can signal priorities. In this case, the decision not to revisit past narratives suggests a focus on moving forward rather than looking back. We should also recognize the role of audience interpretation. Different people will take different lessons from the same situation. Some may focus on the idea of personal growth, others on the dynamics of public relationships, and others on how narratives are shaped. This diversity of interpretation is what keeps stories like this relevant. Even as the details become clearer, the meaning of the story continues to evolve based on how people understand it. Another layer to consider is how this situation reflects broader patterns in media and online culture. Stories involving relationships often attract attention because they are relatable. But the way they are discussed can sometimes oversimplify complex situations. Understanding this helps in approaching similar situations more critically. Instead of accepting narratives at face value, it becomes important to consider context, sources, and the difference between confirmed information and interpretation. At this stage, the story is no longer about a single event. It is about a sequence of events and how they connect. It shows how one moment can lead to another, and how the meaning of those moments can change over time. The key takeaway is that growth and consistency can reshape narratives. While initial perceptions may be influenced by limited information, long-term actions provide a more complete picture. Ultimately, this situation demonstrates that the way a story ends can redefine how it is remembered. Achievements, decisions, and the passage of time all contribute to that outcome. And that brings us to the final thought. This isn't just a story about what happened. It's a story about how things changed and how those changes continue to shape perception. If you've been following this story, you've seen how quickly narratives can change and how powerful growth and silence can be in reshaping everything. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think staying silent was the right move, or should everything have been addressed publicly? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and join the discussion, but keep it respectful and focused on facts, not assumptions. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep breakdowns on trending stories. We'll keep bringing you real analysis behind viral headlines, so stay locked in. Because in situations like this, the truth is often more complex than what you see online. Hashtag Michael B. Jordan, hashtag Lori Harvey, hashtag celebrity news, hashtag media narratives, hashtag stay informed at Michael B. Jordan at Lori Harvey.